When you think of the Wild West, you might picture rugged cowboys and chaotic saloon scenes. But the reality was different. Life on the frontier was tough, especially for children. From indigenous tribes to pioneer families, kids were everywhere, facing dangers and challenges every day. Today, we'll explore what it was really like for children growing up in the Old West. From makeshift schools to early chores, from wild adventures to tight-knit communities, their story is fascinating and often overlooked. Let's dive in. Number 1, stay close to mom for protection. As settlers from the east pushed further into the untamed wilderness of the western frontier, they brought with them not only their ambitions but also their cultural assumptions and societal structures. The clash between these settlers and the indigenous tribes of the Great Plains and beyond created a tumultuous period in American history, marked by conflict, displacement, and profound changes in traditional ways of life. Before the arrival of Europeans, the vast expanse of the Great Plains was home to numerous indigenous tribes, each with its own distinct culture, language, and way of life. The Sioux, with their mastery of horsemanship and hunting, roamed the grasslands alongside the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Kiowa, and many others. These nomadic tribes followed the seasonal movements of buffalo herds, living in harmony with the land and relying on its resources for their survival. In contrast, the Pueblo tribes such as the Zuni and Hopi had established permanent settlements where they practiced agriculture and built intricate stone dwellings. Their societies were organized around communal structures, with elaborate systems of governance and religious beliefs that were deeply intertwined with the natural world. The arrival of European settlers, however, disrupted this delicate balance. Encroaching upon indigenous territories, they claimed land for farming, mining, and settlement, often through treaties that were later broken or ignored. The imposition of reservations further confined indigenous peoples to designated areas, disrupting their traditional ways of life and severing their ties to ancestral lands. One of the most devastating consequences of this displacement was the impact on indigenous children. In indigenous communities, children were not just the responsibility of their immediate family, but were raised collectively by the entire community. Elders passed down knowledge and wisdom, teaching children their cultural heritage and the skills necessary for survival in their environment. However, with the establishment of reservations and the forced assimilation policies of the U.S. government, traditional child-rearing practices came under threat. Indigenous children were often taken from their families and sent to boarding schools, where they were forbidden to speak their native languages or practice their cultural traditions. This systematic erasure of indigenous identity had profound and long-lasting effects on generations of Native Americans. Despite these challenges, indigenous communities persisted in preserving their cultural traditions and values, adapting to the changing circumstances while maintaining their resilience and strength. In many tribes, children continued to be valued as sacred beings, entrusted with the future of their people. Among the Great Plains tribes, the upbringing of children was guided by cultural norms and rituals that instilled a sense of belonging and responsibility from a young age. Boys were initiated into manhood through rites of passage that tested their courage and endurance, while girls were taught the skills of homemaking and child-rearing that would sustain their families and communities. The concept of childhood differed significantly between indigenous and settler societies. While European American children were often sheltered from the harsh realities of life and encouraged to pursue individual aspirations, indigenous children were integrated into the fabric of community life from an early age, learning to contribute to the collective well-being of their tribe. Despite the challenges posed by colonization and forced assimilation, indigenous communities have shown remarkable resilience in preserving their cultural heritage and reclaiming their identities. Today, there is a growing movement to revitalize indigenous languages and traditions, ensuring that future generations will inherit the rich legacy of their ancestors. Number 2, get ready to work hard. Cooperation and hard work were foundational principles for the families who settled in the American West during the 19th century. From the moment they arrived, every member, regardless of age, was expected to contribute to the daily chores essential for survival. In this unforgiving environment, Even the youngest children played crucial roles in maintaining their households and ensuring their families' well-being. Imagine waking up before dawn, the air still crisp with the chill of the night, to begin your day's work. This was the reality for many children on the frontier. Tasks awaited them, ranging from caring for livestock to milking cows, tending to the garden, and gathering firewood. These responsibilities may seem overwhelming by today's standards, especially considering the tender age of the children involved. Sons and daughters alike shared the workload. Gender norms did not exempt girls from laborious tasks. They were expected to pitch in just like their brothers. This equality and responsibility, although born out of necessity rather than ideology, fostered a sense of unity and mutual support within pioneer families. Despite the expectations placed on children, parents and caregivers were mindful of their limitations. While young ones were encouraged to contribute, certain tasks were deemed too dangerous or physically demanding for them to undertake. For instance, tasks involving handling large animals or operating heavy machinery were reserved for adults. This balance between fostering independence and ensuring safety reflected the pragmatic approach of frontier parents. Yet, amidst the toil and hardship, there was a profound sense of purpose that infused the lives of these pioneering children. Their contributions were integral to the survival of their families and the success of their homesteads. The sense of accomplishment derived from completing tasks, no matter how arduous, instilled in them a work ethic that would serve them well throughout their lives. Take the story of Edna Matthews, a young girl who grew up on a farm in the West during the Civil War era. Despite the absence of her father, who was serving as a soldier, Edna and her siblings diligently managed the farm under their mother's guidance. The workload was undeniably challenging, but it provided them with a sense of purpose and resilience. Through their collective efforts, they not only sustained themselves, but also found moments of joy and contentment amidst the hardships. Reflecting on her upbringing years later, Edna fondly recalled the lessons she learned during those formative years. The importance of perseverance, cooperation, and resilience were ingrained in her character through the daily grind of frontier life. These values shaped her into a determined and self-reliant individual, equipped to face whatever challenges life threw her way. Number 3. Pack up. Move out. Repeat endlessly. In the vast expanse of the untamed frontier, a nomadic lifestyle was not just a choice, but a way of survival for many indigenous communities and settler families alike. The relentless cycle of packing up, moving out, and repeating endlessly was a reality that shaped the upbringing of countless children. For indigenous tribes like the Cheyenne, Osage, and Sioux, migration was deeply ingrained in their cultural practices. Each year, they embarked on journeys across the Great Plains, following the rhythms of nature and the availability of resources. These migrations were not only about survival, but also about maintaining connections with allied tribes, trading goods, and passing down traditions from one generation to the next. Similarly, settler families venturing westward faced the arduous task of relocating their homes and livelihoods across vast distances. Children within these families were expected to play an active role in the process, despite the challenges and dangers that accompanied life on the trail. The experience of incessant migration varied among children. While some embraced the thrill of adventure and the opportunity to explore new territories, others found themselves overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. The harsh realities of life on the frontier, where dangers lurked around every corner, added to the burden that these young travelers carried. Imagine being a child, waking up each morning not knowing where your family's next destination would be or what challenges lay ahead. The lack of a stable environment and routine made it difficult for children to make sense of their surroundings and understand the reasons behind their constant movement. Moreover, the dangers of the frontier were ever present. From harsh weather conditions to encounters with wild animals and hostile tribes, the journey posed numerous threats to the safety of children and their families. Yet, despite these challenges, parents had little choice but to keep moving forward, driven by the promise of a better future and the necessity of survival. In this environment, children had to mature quickly, learning essential skills such as navigation, resourcefulness, and resilience. They became adept at adapting to new environments and situations, drawing upon the knowledge passed down by their elders and the lessons learned through firsthand experience. The experiences of frontier children offer valuable insights into the resilience of the human spirit and the adaptability of the human mind. Despite the hardships they faced, these children persevered, carving out a life for themselves amidst the ever-changing landscape of the frontier. Number 4. School was an ordeal. In addition to the challenges faced by school teachers and communities in establishing and maintaining schools in the Wild West, there were also significant hurdles related to curriculum and resources. The curriculum of these one-room schoolhouses was often basic and limited due to the lack of resources and qualified educators. Teachers had to cover multiple subjects for students of varying ages and abilities, often without specialized training in each area. This meant that students received a broad education, but may have missed out on depth in specific subjects. Furthermore, access to textbooks and other educational materials was limited, leading to improvised teaching methods and reliance on oral instruction. Despite these limitations, some innovative teaching methods emerged in the one-room schoolhouses of the Wild West. Teachers often employed peer tutoring, where older students helped younger ones with their studies. This not only aided in academic development, but also fostered a sense of community and cooperation among students. In addition to academic challenges, one-room schoolhouses faced logistical obstacles as well. Harsh weather conditions, long distances, and rough terrain could make it difficult for students to attend school regularly. In some cases, children had to travel several miles on foot or horseback to reach the nearest school, which could be particularly treacherous during the winter months. Moreover, the transient nature of life in the Wild West meant that student enrollment could fluctuate dramatically. Families would move in and out of settlements in search of opportunities, leading to constant changes in the student population. This posed a challenge for teachers trying to maintain continuity in their instruction. Despite these challenges, one-room schoolhouses played a crucial role in shaping the educational landscape of the Wild West. They provided a foundation of learning for generations of children, instilling in them the value of education and a thirst for knowledge. Many notable figures from the era, including politicians, business leaders, and pioneers, received their education in these humble institutions. The legacy of the one-room schoolhouse lives on in the collective memory of the American West. Today, these historic buildings serve as reminders of the resilience and determination of early settlers in the pursuit of education. Through their efforts, they laid the groundwork for the modern education system and inspired future generations to strive for academic excellence. Number 5. School was even worse for Native children. As the frontier expanded across the North American continent, the indigenous peoples faced a systematic assault on their way of life, culture, and identity. One of the most devastating aspects of this assault was the oppressive educational system imposed upon Native families, particularly through the establishment of boarding schools. Boarding schools, which emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, were presented as institutions for the education and assimilation of indigenous children into Euro-American society. However, behind this facade of benevolence lay a dark reality. These schools were tools of cultural genocide, aimed at eradicating traditional tribal cultures and languages. Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families and communities and sent to these boarding schools, where they were subjected to various forms of abuse and indoctrination. Upon arrival, they were often stripped of their original names and assigned new, Western names, further severing their connection to their culture and heritage. Dressed in uniforms that reflected Euro-American styles, they were prohibited from wearing traditional clothing or practicing cultural customs. One of the most insidious aspects of the boarding school experience was the imposition of Christianity upon Native children. They were coerced into adopting Christian beliefs and practices, often at the expense of their own spiritual traditions. This religious indoctrination served to further alienate indigenous children from their cultural roots and reinforce the message of their supposed inferiority. Language suppression was another key tactic used in these schools. Native languages were banned, and children were punished for speaking their mother tongues. The goal was to eradicate indigenous languages and force assimilation into English-speaking society. The conditions within these boarding schools were often deplorable. Overcrowded and underfunded, they lacked adequate sanitation and medical care, leading to rampant disease and mortality among students. Reports of verbal, physical, and sexual abuse were disturbingly common, with staff members exerting unchecked power over vulnerable children. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School, founded in 1879 by Richard Henry Pratt, emerged as a model for the assimilationist agenda. Pratt famously proclaimed, "Kill the Indian, save the man," encapsulating the school's mission to erase indigenous identity through education. Carlisle served as a blueprint for similar institutions across the United States and Canada, perpetuating the cycle of cultural erasure and trauma. Despite resistance from many indigenous families, fueled by a deep-seated desire to preserve their culture and autonomy, the boarding school system persisted for decades. Federal policies mandating attendance further entrenched the system, leading to the forcible removal of countless Native children from their homes. It wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century that the tide began to turn against the boarding school system. Growing awareness of the injustices perpetrated against Indigenous peoples, coupled with advocacy efforts led by Native leaders and organizations, eventually led to the closure of most boarding schools in the 1970s. However, the legacy of these institutions continues to reverberate within Indigenous communities today. Generations of Native people have been impacted by the trauma of boarding school experiences, resulting in intergenerational trauma, loss of language and cultural knowledge, and ongoing struggles for healing and justice. As we confront this painful chapter in history, it is essential to acknowledge the resilience of Indigenous peoples and support efforts to reclaim and revitalize their cultures and languages. Only by confronting the past and working towards reconciliation can we hope to build a more just and equitable future for all.